Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we talk about causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is Nick Mullen. He is a partner and chief advisor at N2 Security. Welcome, Nick.
Pete, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Could you give our audience a little background on yourself and your career?
Yeah, so I've been in the security industry now for a little bit over a decade. Been in technology and technology leadership for about 15 years. I got started in security. I kind of fell into this. And I think there's a lot of folks that you'll probably talk to that would tell you the same thing. I didn't even really start in IT. I kind of fell backwards into a IT project management consultant role. And I figured things out along the way. And then while I was doing that, I got an opportunity to work on a couple of security projects, and I really enjoyed it. Outside of that, I was doing, and this is maybe a fun story to tell at another time. Outside of work at the time, I was doing physical security. So I was a bouncer at a concert hall. And I had a security architect that I worked with in my day job that he could tell I didn't really understand kind of what was going on. And so he did me probably one of the biggest solids of my entire career. This guy sat down with me and he said, "Hey, listen, I know you understand physical security. We're in cybersecurity. Most of the concepts in cybersecurity originated in physical security. And so let me do a one-for-one kind of analogy for you so you understand kind of the way we're applying these, technical concepts the same way that you would apply physical concepts." And it totally changed the trajectory of my career. Within 6 months, I had went back to school to pursue a cybersecurity degree. And here about 10 years later, I did complete that security degree. I've got about 20 different industry certifications, and I'm a partner in a cybersecurity firm. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey to get here.
That's awesome. Yeah, well, and somebody kind of took you under their wing like that. I feel like that doesn't happen maybe as much as it should. And I don't know if that's just because everybody is kind of overworked in security right now and running lean teams and stuff like that. But I'm sure we'll kind of touch on mentorship and how we can get more people into the industry and all that good stuff in a bit. But what do you think about the talent gap? Is that a real thing? And if so, what would you say it looks like?
Yeah, I think it is. And I think the biggest talent gap right now is around entry-level talent, because we're not developing entry-level talent. Everyone wants a mid-career or senior career professional. And like those people have to come from somewhere. Everybody wants the fruit, but nobody wants to tend the plant and, plant the seeds and help grow the fruit. And so everybody's kind of fighting over the same resources while, nobody wants to do the work to develop them on their own. And I say nobody. I'm painting with a very broad brush there because I don't think that's entirely true. But, generally speaking, that's what I've seen in the industry over the last few years is this massive shift from, bringing on entry-level folks, or at least more early career folks, and developing them into your next generation of talent. And now, a lot of those entry-level jobs are, either theoretically being replaced by AI or not so theoretically being offshored.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and as the tooling gets better for instance, like a SOC analyst role, traditionally that would have been one major entry point to the field. But as the tooling gets better, if the tooling is better at analyzing alerts than a level 1 analyst is, then, what do you need the level 1 analyst for? Unless it's just an altruistic move on the hiring manager's part, just to be that good person that does train the next generation. So what do you think the solution is then, like to build more of these professionals at the entry level? Because if everybody says it's not my problem, it becomes everybody's problem. But how do you make that business case to do it?
Yeah, it's a couple of things. The first one is, ultimately you're going to be able to bring on entry-level talent a lot cheaper than, senior career professionals or even mid-career professionals. So from a monetary standpoint, there are a lot of incentives to bring, fresh college grads, or at least, folks that are kind of, career transitioners in and develop them yourself. The other thing is, you hope that they're not necessarily going to come with a lot of bad habits and a lot of baggage, that, someone that's a little bit later in their career might. So you have the opportunity to kind of mold them and instruct them the way you'd like to. The other thing is the pendulum has a tendency to swing very far in both directions. And over the last couple of years, we've seen it swinging very far in one direction, which is, automate and offshore, or just don't hire at all. And I don't know if it's completely kind of reached its peak in that direction, but once it does, it'll start to swing the other way. I mean, we've seen this play out in the tech industry and a lot of different industry sectors for a long time, where they'll spend 5 or 6 years where everybody's trying to outsource, and then everybody outsources and they don't necessarily see the gains that they expected to, or at least they were told that they would see or experience. And then people start to bring things back in house. You're also seeing and hearing the same thing with like cloud computing right now. A few years ago, if you wanted to host your own data center, people would tell you that you were crazy. You might as well just light money on fire because it's way cheaper and way easier to just host everything in the cloud. And I mean, that was true for a certain period of time. But cloud costs continue to rise, and they're going to continue to rise. You look at, whether it's Azure, GCP, AWS, or even some of the VMware Broadcom conversation that's going on in the industry right now. Like, it continues to get more and more expensive to operate out of, to put everything on someone else's computer, for lack of better words. And we've seen the pendulums start to swing back the other way, where there are a lot of organizations that are bringing data centers back in house, or at least they're moving from a completely, public cloud model to more of a hybrid cloud model. And I think we're going to see the same thing in the security staffing space.
Yeah. Well, and it brings up, I guess, the idea to me that we ought to be more long-term focused than short-term focused. I think there's a lot of short-term thinking that goes on, especially when it comes to staffing a team. You're basically reacting in a lot of cases, and you're not thinking ahead to what the market's going to look like in 5-10 years, which, to your point, I think, we're going to see a pendulum swing where, since nobody is training the juniors today, we're going to have a shortage of senior people in 5-10 years. So what do you think companies can do to get ready for that at this point in time?
There are going to be some companies that, and they probably aren't out there, cheering themselves on, but there are going to be some companies that they do kind of think more long-term. They think strategically. They're developing people, and they're not going to have this problem because they're going to have a good, talent pool that they can kind of pull from. There are going to be other companies that, they're going to be in the Hunger Games, where everybody's kind of fighting over the same resources. Everybody, when you do find a resource or you do find some talent, you're going to have to vastly overpay for them, at least comparatively to what you could have paid for them 2 or 3 years ago. It's going to be a very similar situation to what we saw in, say 2019, 2020, 2021, where the salaries were through the roof. People were having a very, very difficult time finding, mid or senior career professionals. And when they did, they had to pay for it. That I think that's going to be what happens. I hope that people will learn their lesson. I'm not necessarily optimistic because, it's the way that things work right now for a lot of companies, especially publicly traded companies or companies that are backed by, private equity or VC, is they have a quarterly number that they have to hit. And then that's really the driver for a lot of their business decisions is that number. And so the executives, they really aren't in a position where they can think long-term because, they're dealing with short-term problems. They're dealing with board pressure, and everything revolves around these quarterly earnings.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, and it would seem to me that the ideal setup then would be to be constantly building pipelines of junior folks to where you're not paying much for them, but you're getting them on board at a time when they're cheap, and you don't have to scramble over them in their salaries at the last minute once they've gotten to that senior level. But then you also have to make sure that you're maintaining in retaining those employees over time, which I think a lot of people, when they think about hiring somebody junior level, that's their fear is we hire somebody junior, we put in all of this effort in training this person and time and money and infrastructure to support this person, and they're going to leave in a year because there's no loyalty from the employee side anymore, which, I would argue that there's really no there's no employer loyalty either, for the employer side. Any thoughts on how we can improve that setup, I guess, loyalty on both sides?
Yes, I do have a couple thoughts around that. One thing I was just going to call out, if you look in football, like there have been a couple different examples that are pretty well known over the last like 20 or 30 years. So there's the Bill Walsh coaching tree. I don't know if you're familiar with that term or not. Bill Parcells had one, Mike Holmgren had one, Bill Belichick had one, and they call them these coaching trees. And like, if you go on there's certain websites out there that actually kind of display this, but they start with, we'll say Bill Walsh. So Bill Walsh won a bunch of Super Bowls with the San Francisco 49ers, one of the most successful NFL coaches of all time. And then if you look at all the other coaches and executives that originated with Bill Walsh, they started on his staff, and over the next 15 or 20 years, they were everywhere in the NFL because he continued to kind of bring on young talent and develop them over the years. And then when those people left, he had great relationships with executives and coaches all across the league. So when he needed to do things like execute trades, he already had strong trust-based relationships with a lot of those people because he's the one that helped give them their chance. And so he was a lot more successful from an executive standpoint because he had built out this coaching tree. In modern times, you look at Bill Belichick, he did the exact same thing. Bill Belichick had coaches at one point in time. This is probably closer to like 10 years ago, but I remember that over 50% of the teams in the NFL had a high ranking coach or executive on their staff that used to work for the New England Patriots. And when you look at the amount of success that Belichick and the Patriots had over that same span of time, like it's not easy to see, or it's not hard to see where some of that possibly originated from. So if you're a hiring manager and you're really like, you're planning to be in this game for the long term, or you're a business owner or, an executive in a company, you need to build out your coaching tree because it's going to pay dividends to you for years, for decades, and you'll be able to get things done that your peers won't be able to get done. There's a lot of added benefit to this. You look today in the NFL, there aren't those same coaching trees, or at least not to the degree that there used to be. And you see a lot of head coaches that only last a year, or maybe not even a year. They're getting fired very quickly. You've got very ineffective executives. I'm from Illinois. I'm a Chicago Bears fan, and I can tell you all about ineffective GMs and bad head coaches because it's about all we've had since Lovie Smith. And a lot of that is because we keep chasing that next, shiny object instead of playing, more of a long-term game. And I think that we're finding ourselves as an industry in that exact same scenario.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, I often say this in my experience as an external recruiter, 99% of hiring is just poaching from a direct competitor. Somebody who's had the same job title, done the same job yesterday, basically. How do you, I guess, get around that idea of, or that propensity for risk aversion, where people don't want to take any risks on hires and they want to hire a known entity, known quantity? Is there any way to address that?
Yeah. I mean, if we're talking strictly in a risk management sense, I mean, one of the best ways to, reduce the risk of a situation is to reduce the vulnerability. So if you've got a risk of an employee that's a single point of failure, like the time to address that risk isn't when they're leaving. The time to address that risk is while they're still there, and make sure they're not a single point of failure, and have, some redundancy and skill sets and capabilities. And that also may be one of the things that helps you keep talent, because one of the reasons people leave is because they get burnt out. They get tired of being the only person who has any of this institutional knowledge, the only person that gets a phone call when there's a problem. They feel like they're always waiting for the other shoe to drop. They can't sleep at night during holiday seasons because they're worried that, hey, when I go to leave for, Christmas with my family, I'm going to start getting phone calls because I'm the only one who knows anything about this. And eventually those people get tired of that and they leave. So if you want to avoid, that risk, you need to address the vulnerability, which is usually these single points of failure or over reliance on senior staff.
Yeah, well, it seems becoming nowadays it seems like it's more and more common, I guess, for that to happen, where the teams are extra lean. I mean, I see that even in the recruiting space right now, where everybody's trying to run with as lean of recruiting teams as possible. And like you said, the recruiters end up handling 20, 30 job orders a piece, and there's no way that they can be effective in filling all of those different roles. And that goes back to, I guess, just the state of the market right now, where you have thousands of applicants per role and each internal recruiter has 20, 30 open jobs at once. It's no wonder that people are getting ignored.
Yeah.
There's just only so many hours in a day for those internal recruiters. So
I'm going to open a can of worms here with you, Peter. Thousands of applicants.
Yeah.
Because they're not all real.
Have you seen that firsthand?
Mm-hmm. I sure have. Either just completely like they don't exist at all, or they've misrepresented who they are. So either like someone that's impersonating someone else, or the entire person is fake. Yep, I've seen both. Or then I guess the third one would they misrepresent where they are, and their hiring eligibility. And then all of a sudden you spend a lot of time with someone and you get to the end and realize that, oh, wait, I'm going to have to sponsor them. And, for a lot of organizations, that's a non-starter because it's like that. That's not just like, hey, I go write a check and I can sponsor this guy now. That's not how that process works. And so that creates an entire different set of problems there. But yeah, fake candidates, very real. It's happening all over the place. In fact, I just saw a thing on Reddit about this. This may have been one of my most upvoted comments on Reddit recently. I might be outing myself from my Reddit profile if anybody's been on I think it was in the recruiting hell subreddit, but there was a guy on there who worked in IT and he said, hey, I'm having this really big problem where HR is coming back to me and they're saying, we're getting all these fake candidates, or like AI generated profiles, and we need you to help solve this problem. And I basically told this guy like, hey, this is a risk management problem and you need to look at it through a risk management lens. Like the threat of these fake applicants is not going to go away. Especially with the AI tools that we have right now and the resume generator services that you can go out there and, basically scan a JD and then put together a resume in 5 minutes with ChatGPT. Not saying it's going to be the greatest one out there, but it's not going to be bad.
It'll be passable. Yeah.
It's going to be passable. And so like that threat's not going away. So you have to address the vulnerability. If 90% of the fake applicants that you're seeing come through are on IT roles that you're posting on LinkedIn with an easy apply option, then that's where you start, because that's where the most noise is coming in. That's what's wasting the most time. Either turn off the easy apply option, or maybe take some of these IT roles and only try to advertise them maybe in different locations where you receive a lower number of fake applicants, or at least kind of sketchy applicants, and address it that way. But the thing is that the threat's not going to go away. Pandora's box is open and we're going to continue to see this problem. I mean, my prediction is we're going to see this problem forever. The problem was there before. It just wasn't as sophisticated. I mean, there's people out there that, impersonated someone else to go and get a job. It was typically a lot more of an analog type thing than digital. But right now, the ability to do that has increased, by orders of magnitude, and it's so much faster to do because of AI.
Yeah. I remember hearing stories back when I was working at Kforce in 2013 or so, where developers would interview for jobs and they weren't actually the ones being hired. It was somebody else just basically taking their spot and posing as them. And somebody else would show up on the actual first day of work and everybody would be surprised. But yeah, as technology gets better, it's only going to get worse. Definitely don't. I guess our detection capability could get better over time as well, technically.
Yeah.
Do you think that's ever going to be the case where it gets less bad because our ability to detect fakes is better?
Yeah, in some ways. I mean, it's always a cat and mouse game. And like I'm going to say the, whether you're talking about the security professionals or the hiring manager or whatever, like we're on one side of it and we have a set of rules that we have to play by. The other side does not have a set of rules that they have to play by, or at least not as a well-defined set of rules. And so it's always going to put us on our back foot. But yeah, what I anticipate probably happening is very similar to what we see in like the email security or the phishing space, where the really bad ones get filtered out. The ones that make it past are the worst ones, the most dangerous, the most likely to actually present a real risk to you if they end up getting in front of a hiring manager, because they've invested the time and the energy into putting together a real specific candidate profile, and they're invested in trying to get this person hired. Typically, when you see somebody that's investing that much time and resources into something, it's probably either going to be a few different kind of root causes there. The folks that have the most resources are nation states, and we've absolutely seen this with North Korea over the last couple of years. In fact, the DOJ and the FBI have both issued warnings to hiring managers out there about some of these impersonation attacks that we're seeing from North Korea. They're using it either to deploy ransomware and then basically get money that way, or for corporate espionage. We see that a lot coming out of China. So yeah, I mean, the ones that still make it through are going to be the most impactful. The low effort candidates, we're going to have tools that can help screen those out. But on the other side of that coin, there's the false positives. So you're going to have real folks that just, may have a sketchy looking resume unbeknownst to them, that are now getting no opportunities, and they have no idea why. And it's going to be extremely frustrating for those people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the signal to noise ratio problem has only gotten worse over the last 5 years. And as the tooling gets better on the applicant side, tooling gets better on the employer side or the recruiter side, you have bots they're basically just talking to each other, and there's no human in the process. So I think ironically, the better the technology has gotten, the worse the hiring process has become. I think it's more of a people and a process issue and not a technology issue. I think we need to put more humans back into human resources and have people with human intelligence reviewing resumes. And I personally think that we could fix 99% of, at least on the front end of the hiring pipeline, we could fix 99% of the problems by just having recruiters go outbound and source their own candidates like I do, versus just relying on inbound applications. Because there's so much that can happen when you're getting flooded with thousands of applications. And like you were saying, a lot of which are fake or bad actors. So,
but exactly to your point, if you're not willing to invest in humans and human resources, they're not going to have the time to do any of that outbound research or outreach. And that's like HR and recruiting departments have been gutted over the last few years, because of a lot of promises of automation and AI is going to be able to do their job. And, anytime you tell an executive that, hey, I've got this new tool out here that you only have to pay for, once, and you can reduce an annual salary or two and save yourself 50%, like that's going to be real appealing. And a lot of people have fallen for that over the last few years, and they probably have not seen the return on investment that they thought they would. Part of that is because the metrics that they use to track success are the metrics that, these software companies tell them that they should be using to track success. And so the software company tells you what success looks like. They tell you how to measure that, and you'll never believe it, but those metrics favor the software companies.
Go figure.
Yeah. Who would have thought?
Yeah. Well, I think, people definitely respond to incentives. And I mean, I can tell you from my experience as a recruiter, going outbound to me doesn't take any more time than fielding inbound applications, especially if you have thousands of applications. You could go through thousands of LinkedIn profiles a day for the same amount of time as it takes to review thousands of applications, 95% of which are not going to be qualified. It's a 95% roughly failure rate for inbound. So, but it's hard. Yeah. It seems like it would take more time to go outbound, but I think if you know what you're looking for, it's actually the same amount of time, if not less, and you're saving all the candidates all the time too. But yeah, there's only so many hours in a day. Any thoughts on, I guess, how to solve the downfalls of recruiting nowadays, like overworked internal recruiters or poorly educated internal recruiters? Is there something, the hiring managers can do out there to ensure that they're seeing better success?
Oh, from the hiring manager standpoint, absolutely. Get more invested in the process. Because there are a lot of opportunities out there to just hand a 1 or 2 bullet job description of, hey, this is kind of what I'm looking for, off to a recruiter. And then like, it's up to them to put together the JD and almost like read your mind to figure out what you're really looking for, what problems you're trying to solve. Like I'm actually in the process of hiring a project manager right now. And I wrote the entire job description for it, because this is the first PM that we're bringing in for this specific role. And so, yeah, I wrote the entire job description. I'm the hiring manager. And it took me some time, but like it was worth spending that time, because I knew that by having a better JD out there, that I should theoretically get better candidates. And I did. I got great candidates. In fact, I got a couple candidates that almost 1 for 1 had the exact skill sets that I was looking for. One of them even in the exact industry that I was looking for. And like, that wasn't just because they curated their resume with AI. Like, we met with them, we talked to them, and they were exactly what they said they were. But again, like, as a hiring manager, I invested time into the process to help ensure that I had success. If you're a hiring manager and you're not willing to invest that time in the front end, you can't be surprised. You can't be upset when, the recruiter is not a mind reader, when the candidates that you receive aren't exactly what you need, because you didn't do a good job of quantifying exactly what you needed. It's just, as a society, we've done a really good job of, trying to pass the buck to other folks over the last few years, and not necessarily take accountability for our own actions or inactions. And that's why I think a lot of people are in the situation where they're coming back saying, well, I can't find any good candidates. Well, how much time are you investing into it? I mean, I hired 3 interns this year, unpaid internship. I mean, if I had the money, but N2 Security is a startup, like, we're not making a lot of money. If I would have had the money to pay the interns, I absolutely would have. But I posted the job as an unpaid internship, and I posted a free job ad on LinkedIn. So I'm sure you're very familiar with these. When you post a free job ad, you get 50 applicants. I actually had 52 come through before it shut me down in like just a couple hours. And I ended up not only finding 1 intern, but I found 3 phenomenal candidates out of that pool and like, again, this posting was only up for 3 hours. Now, I did a really good job of explaining why there would still be a benefit to these interns to come and do this unpaid internship. Like, I made commitments in the job posting that I followed through on as a hiring manager when they actually started. And I basically did a lot of that work on the front end to make sure that I had done, everything I could to get a good candidate pool. And I did. And I was very honest and transparent with everybody about what was going to happen, what the hours would be, that it was an unpaid internship. And again, like, I didn't have to deal with as much BS as I think some other folks do, because I invested the time on the front end. That doesn't mean that I didn't get any bad applicants. Like, one of the things in there was like, you had to be in the United States. I wasn't going to sponsor you. And half the applicants that came through weren't in the United States or required sponsorships, which is fine. That was very easy to, basically filter those out. But I still ended up with a pretty strong candidate pool even after that. But I had to spend some time on it. If you're not willing to invest any time in the process, then you can't be surprised or upset when the candidates don't either.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of people discount how much time they can actually save by investing that time on the front end. I mean, it quickly adds up if you're interviewing people that aren't a fit. I mean, you figure 1 hour for each call. Um, how long does it take you to put together a proper job description or, brief your recruiters on exactly what you need? I mean, you're looking at a few hours there, maybe. But, if you get 8 unqualified applicants that you spend an hour on each, that adds up pretty quick. So, yeah, you absolutely get out what you put into it, I think, on the front end.
And you look pretty foolish when you go into the interview and they're asking you, like a good candidate, like the ones that you actually want. They're going to come in and start asking you some pretty pointed questions about the job and what problems you're trying to solve. And if you're just going in there winging it, then you look like an idiot as a hiring manager, and your best candidates aren't going to want to work for you.
Yeah. Well, and it's so important to do some selling, I think, as the hiring team as well. And sometimes I'll get the sense from hiring teams that, hey, they should want to work for us. We're awesome. Can't they see how awesome we are? And, most of the time, unless you're Google, the candidate doesn't know anything about your team or even your company, especially if you're a startup. I mean, most of my clients over the years have been startups, and you have to weave together a compelling story to get those top level candidates interested. It's not magic. You just have to create a story about why you're great. And like you said, be very clear about expectations and transparent. And if there are challenges that you foresee for this person in this role, be very upfront about those. Worst thing you can do really is surprise somebody with downsides.
And even if you are a Google today, or whether we're talking about, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, like all your FAANG companies that are out there that at one point in time were destination employers. Now I would say, just kind of based on some of the layoffs and the way that they've treated a lot of employees over the last couple of years, those are destination stops, not destination employers. Like, this is a place that I want to have on my resume and show that I worked there for a couple of years. It can help me, get my salary up and help me in future negotiations. But there are a lot of folks that have recognized that, like, those aren't necessarily safe havens. Those aren't forever jobs. Those are places that you make a temporary stop at. And it's not because people don't want to work at Google or Microsoft or Amazon forever. It's because they don't trust that, the next time they have a bad quarter, they're not going to get laid off along with 50,000 of their coworkers. When they try to log in the morning or they show up at the building, their badge isn't going to work anymore. Like, the way that employers have handled layoffs over the last couple of years has been awful. It's been very inhumane. And I think a lot of those larger employers are going to see that they're not going to be able to recruit and retain talent the way that they used to be because of the way that they treat them once they come through the door.
Yeah, they've damaged their employer brand, and it takes forever to build a brand and doesn't take much time at all to destroy one, employers included. People definitely have long memories for that kind of thing. They want to go where they feel valued and where they feel some stability. And I mean, just for so many job seekers I talk to these days, nobody feels like there is such thing as stability anymore, almost. I mean, I advise the job seekers, go where the money is, because you can't count on these large entities to be, not looking at their quarterly numbers as hard, like you mentioned, and laying people off constantly. So go where the venture capital money is headed, go where the latest rounds of funding are, basically, and follow that around, because that's the closest thing that you'll probably get to stability in this environment. But like, how do you make employees feel secure and loyal as an employer? What do you think it takes to engender that sense of loyalty from the employee side?
Well, I mean, the first piece there is you need to have a demonstrated history of not behaving badly as an organization. Because exactly like you said, once you create that, like once you get that reputation, once you have that stigma, it's very difficult for it to go away. This loss of trust is very hard to regain. I can think back to a company I used to work for, not going to say who they were, but they rebranded, and they had a bunch of these like internal tenets of like, these are the things that we're going to do to be successful as an organization. And one of them, I'll never forget this. This is several years ago, and I still remember: enriching lives and communities we serve. Less than 6 months after they came out with that, they outsourced several hundred jobs to India and laid off all those people in the number one community that they served. And you got to ask, like, how are you enriching lives and communities you serve when you just laid off 300 people in the community, like the number one community that you serve? Because that was where their number one customer base was, is where their home office was. And like, again, I still talk about this years later, and I still have former coworkers of mine that talk about that years later. So like, once you've breached that trust, or once you've, introduced what in this case was just an insane amount of hypocrisy, like, people aren't going to forget about it. So like, the number one thing you can do is don't screw up to begin with, or at least kind of think about what the consequences of your actions may be when you're just going out there and you're trying to, cut costs, but those cost cutting measures impact real people and real people's lives, particularly people that, that live and work in your community. Like, you got to be forward thinking about that. The other thing, like from a hiring manager standpoint, is be willing to develop your people, and not just like, that can't just be words on paper. Like, you actually have to really do it. So if you're going out and you're, fighting for budget for next year, make sure that some of the budget that you're fighting for is for training and travel. Like, if every year that's the line item that you're giving up on, what you're really doing is you're giving up on professional development for your employees, and they're going to end up leaving and going somewhere else. Like, I worked for another company. I worked for them for years, and never once were they willing to fund me to go to a conference, even like a local conference, like 15 minutes down the road that costs $100 to go to. Nope, we don't have money for that. They wouldn't fund, any continuing education for me. I couldn't join any industry groups. Anything that I wanted to do had to come out of pocket. And you'll never believe it, but this company didn't pay me well enough for that type of stuff to come out of pocket. And the first opportunity I had to leave, I did.
Yeah. Well, that's a common thing I hear as a recruiter, is people's motivators for making a move. And that's one of them. I don't feel like I'm challenged, especially for those, high achievers that are always looking for a challenge and the next greatest thing. They need to be constantly stimulated and learning, or they'll get bored very, very quickly and move on. So there are certainly some extra costs, I would say, to retaining top talent. But you have to know that you have to pay now in ongoing training and development, or pay later when they leave and you have to end up backfilling their role. And, chances are they've amassed a bunch of institutional knowledge and proprietary knowledge of all sorts, shapes and sorts, and a unique combination of skills that you can't just readily replace out there on the market. And if you can, then you're going to have to pay through the nose for it. So,
and there's a real cost to vacancy. You have a bunch of seats that are unfilled. On one hand, you can look at it and say, well, I'm not paying salaries for those right now. But instead, did you just double or triple the workload for existing employees? Are you not able to execute on initiatives that you really need to? Like, do you have some major cost saving measures that are now maybe put on the backlog because you don't have the personnel to execute on these projects anymore? Like, these open seats, like they can absolutely cost your company money. And if you end up with a lot of open seats because you've got high turnover, like, even beyond the short-term monetary cost, like the long-term loss of productivity and what's the word I'm looking for here? The ability to kind of plan and execute on long-term initiatives, like, goes out the window, and there's a very high cost to that as well.
For sure. So what would you say, I guess, are some best practices to retaining people? So you had mentioned ongoing training and development, obviously doing what you say you're going to do, kind of, not making those giant mistakes. Anything else you can think of that would help people stick around?
Yeah. I mean, checking in with them on a regular basis to make sure that their workloads are manageable. And if you've got somebody that continues to complain that, like, hey, I'm working 60 hours a week, I'm working on nights and weekends, even if they're not complaining as their leader, like, you can tell when somebody's working 50, 60, 70 hours a week. Like, if you've got somebody that's headed down that path, recognize that early and do something about it. Like, don't wait until they get so frustrated that they leave, because by that point in time, it's too late. Like, you need to be, preventative and address these issues as they're coming up. That's one of the, I would say, top things that can, keep people from leaving. Pay competitive salaries. If somebody's coming to you and saying like, hey, I don't feel like my salary lines up with industry average. The worst thing that you can do is tell them to go out and get a competing offer so you can match it. Because honestly, like, here's my advice to job seekers: never take the counter offer from the company that you're at right now. If you wanted to leave, there's a reason for it. And if they made you go out and get an offer from somebody else, they made you go jump through all these hoops to get paid what they already knew that they should be paying you. And that's not a company you want to work for. So don't do those things. Like, this isn't rocket science, but there's a lot of companies out there that do stuff like that because you can operate that way 20 or 30 years ago and you could get away with it. But it's a different environment today. Like, you can't do that unless it's during a time of extreme economic downturn, where now you have the opportunity to kind of take advantage of employees a little bit more. But guess what? Those employees that got taken advantage of, they are not going to forget when that pendulum swings the other way, and the employees have a lot more power.
Yeah, well, and never has information been so easy to access either. Now we have Glassdoor, and boy, if you're doing things wrong, people are going to know about it on Glassdoor.
Yep.
For good and for ill. If you're doing well, then it's a great way for you, without having to influence it, showcase how amazing your company is. But it certainly swings the other direction, probably more often than not, I would say. Even companies that I know are pretty good companies, they can still have pretty negative stuff on there. And I think there's a bias towards people that have extreme experiences in, one direction or another, obviously. But yeah, word gets around too.
Nothing spreads faster than bad news.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, if you go on Glassdoor, there's a lot of negative on there. Some of it very well deserved, some of it not so well deserved. So yeah, you always have to take that with a grain of salt. But if you notice that like every single review is talking about, hey, I didn't get a raise in 5 years. They made me go out and get another offer before they'd entertain, a salary adjustment. I ended up getting an offer someplace else for, 100% more or 50% more than I was making here. Where there's smoke, there's fire.
Yeah. I tend to want to look for common denominators or common themes in those reviews to know what's actually a recurring problem and what's just somebody having a really bad day, or somebody that was a bad employee that got frustrated,
or they had one bad leader. Like, is this an organizational issue or is this an individual issue? Yeah, exactly to your point. Like, if you see that like the same message points are getting put across some of these reviews over and over, it's probably an organizational issue.
For sure. Well, we're actually coming up on time here, Nick. So just want to make sure I can ask you the one last question. Is there anything that we're not talking about in the industry, but we should be, especially as it relates to hiring?
Yeah. And I say this a lot. If you're out there, you're trying to break into security or you're trying to break into IT, really, you're trying to break into anything. If you aren't one of those, like mid or late career professionals that has, a resume full of accomplishments and experience that sells itself, then you have to sell yourself. Like, a lot of people rely on the resume to do the heavy lifting for them when their resume, it hasn't put enough reps in to do all of that. So like, you have to be able to tell a story a little bit. So the thing that I would encourage people to do, if you're trying to break into any new industry, is get good at telling those stories. And one of the best stories that you can tell is what you can come in and do day one. What problem can you solve right away? What work can you take off the team's plate right away? Because then you come in as a value add instead of a time suck. Like, if I'm going to bring somebody in and I have to teach them how to do absolutely everything, then not only are they not adding any value, but they're taking time away from my seniors, at least for the short term. If I've got another candidate that can at least come in and do one or two things, and I know that they can operate independently here in this space for a little while we train them up on these other things, then like, now I'm getting some immediate value out of that person. The thing is, almost every single candidate has some immediate value that they can add. They just have to get better at telling that story. And so that's the thing that I would encourage people to do, is they're trying to break into the industry, or even if you're somebody that, maybe experienced a layoff over the last couple of years and you're having a hard time finding something new, get better at storytelling and get better at selling yourself. Like that is time that you would invest that you will never regret.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and every security role these days is a sales role in some capacity. You're selling to stakeholders in your organization. You're selling to the hiring manager. As a hiring manager, you're selling to the candidate, or at least you should be. But yeah, the power of story, it really can't be understated as a sales tool for sure. And that's what when I talk to candidates, I try to weave together a compelling story about the companies that I represent, because I think stories, they have a unique way of reaching people where just even bullet points don't necessarily, people they like narrative, I guess. So
We do. I mean, we are as a people, like, we are very story driven. There's a reason why, the movie industry makes as much money as it does, because people like stories, and that's what captures attention. That's what keeps attention. So absolutely get good at telling those stories and figure out what your own personal narrative is.
Awesome. Well, that's a great point and great place to end. Nick, if people want to reach out to you, what's the best way to do so?
You can visit our website, www.n2security.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. Again, my name is Nick Mullen.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your time, Nick. Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Talent Gap Fireside Chat. Don't forget to follow our page on LinkedIn and like and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube. Hit that notification bell to be notified when we drop a new episode. New episodes air every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern.